For today's Targets in Focus, I am joined by Mark Oswald, FX and Rates Strategist at Monument Securities in London. Thank you for joining me, Mark. First of all, I would like to start by discussing the euro-pound. The sterling is currently perceived as a safe currency. Do you think this will continue, and why?
I think to some extent it is, like so many of these currencies, a safe haven because it doesn't face any immediate threats. The longevity of it actually is very much contingent on where economic policy goes next, particularly if the current UK coalition government perceives its unpopularity to be a cue to start loosening some of its fiscal policy, at which point, depending on what's going on in the Eurozone, there may be concerns that it's really, we're going to get a lot more loosening of monetary policy here in the UK, as well as of fiscal policy. And then in terms of the constellation of alternatives to the euro, because essentially that's really what this is all about, sterling probably goes to what one would call the back of the queue with the dollar and the yen, and to a much smaller extent the Swiss franc and the Canadian dollar getting ahead of sterling. At the moment, sterling is seen as the closest viable alternative.
What is your outlook for the pound dollar, and what are your reasons behind this?
I think on a 3-month outlook, you'd probably be looking for sterling to start to drift weaker against the euro, simply because I think in that time frame we will have a further loosening of monetary policy, and we will have some very, very clear signals that the government's going to loosen fiscal policy. At that point, we'll also probably have a stronger indication, as was hinted at in today's MPC minutes, that the Bank of England is actually concerned about the strength of sterling, something which it hasn't really voiced much in the way of concerns about for at least 1 to 2 years, actually.
And what is your 3-month outlook for this currency pair?
I think sterling dollar is a more complicated one to have a guess at, assuming that we are going to have hit a fairly large brick wall in the Eurozone. Then I think anything which is European, i.e. not just Eurozone, is likely to suffer. The UK conducts a lot of its trade with the Eurozone. Its banking sector has more exposure to the Eurozone than many of the others. And as such, one would have to be worried that sterling will continue to weaken, probably trying to test this major trend line we've got over the past 5 years down at 154.5, but probably only reaching 155, simply because there is no real incentive to completely dump alternatives to the euro. So a downward trend against the dollar, but not one which at the moment will threaten a breakout on the downside.
The Japanese yen strengthened against the dollar today after the Bank of Japan failed to uncover any new easing measures. How do you see this currency pair performing over the next 3 months, and what are your reasons for this prediction?
The yen is possibly the most complex currency in the world. If you looked at the fundamentals of Japan, the obvious failures of the whole political system, they've had 7 prime ministers in 8 years, its diabolical debt to GDP ratio, its inability to institute any reforms, and its huge problems that it faces in the long run with regards to an aging population and a hugely uncompetitive industry, you would have thought that the yen would be weakening a lot more. But in this constellation at the moment, whereby the yen, or rather the Japanese banking system, is seen as far more secure than most of the other G7 banking systems, excluding Canada, it continues to strengthen. And this despite huge outflows from Japan to buy foreign assets. So in the very short term, I think all the efforts of the Bank of Japan, even if it does institute more easing, will actually fail to weaken the yen in any significant way, as long as those concerns about the Eurozone are there. So it then gets stuck in a range, effectively, which is 78, probably 78.5 to 81. But the market's tendency will be to try and buy more yen, simply because the whole efforts to try and weaken the yen have proved so singularly unsuccessful.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing some of your latest forecasts. Stay tuned to Dukascopy TV for more exclusive interviews and press reviews. Goodbye for now.